Me tell you something powerful today. Your life will never rise above the condition of your mind. You can have talent, opportunity, favor knocking at your door, but if your mind is broken, you will sabotage every blessing that comes near you. Life does not break people first. The mind does. A broken life is not created in one moment. It happens when disappointment moves in and hope moves out. It happens when fear is allowed to speak louder than faith, when pain becomes your identity, and when memory keeps replaying what should have already expired. Broken life looks functional on the outside, but exhausted on the inside. But a strong mind, oh, a strong mind is dangerous. A strong mind does not deny pain. It dominates pain. It says, I may be hurt, but I am not helpless. I may be delayed, but I am not denied. A strong mind understands that seasons change, and hardship is not a prison. It's a classroom. A broken life bows to pressure. A strong mind learns how to stand while pressure is pushing. Pressure does not destroy strength. It reveals weakness. What you refuse to confront in your mind will eventually control your future. Let me be clear, your thoughts are not harmless. What you think repeatedly, you eventually obey. That's why some people stay trapped, not because doors are locked, but because their thinking is limited. They escape situations, but never escape mental captivity. A strong mind knows how to speak to itself. When doubt rises, it answers back with truth. When fear shows up, it reminds itself of past victories. When exhaustion whispers, quit, a strong mind responds, rest if you must. Don't surrender. A broken life lives in yesterday's pain. A strong mind borrows courage from tomorrow. It understands that survival is not the same as living, and healing is not instant, but it is intentional. You don't develop a strong mind by avoiding struggle. You develop it by remaining disciplined when life gets uncomfortable. Every time you choose growth over bitterness, clarity over chaos, faith over fear, you reinforce strength in your mind. You cannot control what happened to you. You can control what happens inside of you. When your mind becomes strong, your life has no choice but to follow. Strong minds build restored lives. Weak thoughts produce collapsed futures. Your life will never exceed the strength of your mind. That is not a motivational slogan. It is a reality that governs every human experience. Long before the outcomes show up in your habits, your relationships, your finances, or your purpose, they have already taken root in your thinking. The mind is the command center of the soul. Whatever is repeatedly entertained there eventually finds expression in real life. That is why two people can face the same pressure, the same obstacles, the same setbacks, yet emerge with completely different outcomes. The difference is not luck, background, or opportunity. The difference is mental strength. A weak mind does not mean an unintelligent person. It means a mind that has not been trained to resist fear, confront doubt, or outlast discomfort. Weak mind surrenders quickly, not because the situation is impossible, but because the inner voice has been allowed to become discouraging, noisy, and uncontrolled. When the mind collapses, life soon follows. People call it bad circumstances, but in reality, it is often unmanaged thinking, making decisions behind the scenes. Your mind interprets the world before you ever respond to it. If your thinking is fearful, you will see threats everywhere. If your thinking is defeated, you will interpret challenges as proof that you should quit. But when the mind is strong, problems are not enemies. They are assignments. A strong mind does not romanticize struggle, but it refuses to be intimidated by it. It understands that difficulty is not a signal to retreat. It is an invitation to grow. Many people live beneath their potential not because life denied them access, but because their thinking denied them permission. Talk themselves out of opportunities before failure ever speaks. They rehearse rejection so often that success feels unfamiliar. Over time, limitation becomes comfortable and comfort becomes a cage. Tragedy is not failure. It is living a small life because the mind never developed the courage to stretch. A strong mind is not built overnight. It is trained daily through intentional choices. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, clarity over chaos, truth over emotion, you reinforce strength within your thinking. Mental strength grows quietly. It is shaped in moments when no one is clapping, when you wake up tired but still show up, when you are misunderstood but still remain focused, when quitting would be easier but endurance makes more sense. Your mind must be stronger than your feelings. Feelings are real. but they are not reliable leaders. If your life is controlled by emotion alone, consistency will always escape you. A strong mind acknowledges emotion without being ruled by it. It says, I feel tired, but I am still committed. I feel afraid, but I am still moving forward. Strength is not the absence of emotion, it is the mastery of it. A person with a strong mind is not immune to setbacks. They feel disappointment deeply, but they do not let disappointment define them. They grieve, they do not get stuck. They fall, but they do not fold. What separates them from the broken is not a lack of pain, a refusal to let pain rewrite their identity. They understand that what happens to you is an event, but what you believe after is a choice. Your thoughts eventually become commands. What you repeatedly tell yourself will shape the boundaries of your world. You keep saying, I can't. Your life will shrink to match that confession. If you keep saying, I'll try, your effort will remain hesitant. But when the mind is strengthened, the language changes. It becomes deliberate. It becomes intentional. It becomes rooted in possibility rather than limitation. It will test your thinking before it tests your strength. It will apply pressure, delay answers, and stretch timelines, not to destroy you, but to expose what you are anchored to. When your identity is rooted in outcomes, failure will devastate you. When your identity is rooted in purpose, failure becomes feedback. A strong mind doesn't panic when conditions change. It adapts, learns, and continues. Your mind must be guarded. Not every voice deserves access. Not every opinion qualifies as truth. A weak mind absorbs everything and becomes confused. A strong mind filters information, measures counsel, and protects focus. It understands that attention is currency. Whatever you invested in will eventually own part of you. You cannot build a strong future with an undisciplined mind. Every habit you sustain was first a thought you allowed. Every breakthrough you admire began as an idea that someone believed long before it became visible. Mind always goes first, life follows later. That is why change that happens only on the outside never lasts. Change that begins within the mind transforms everything it touches. A strong mind does not wait for motivation. It operates on commitment. Motivation fluctuates with mood, but commitment is anchored in purpose. When the mind understands the why, it finds the strength to endure the how. This is how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. Not by extraordinary talent, by extraordinary mental endurance. If you want your life to rise, your mind must expand. If you want stability, your thinking must mature. If you want peace, your mind must be trained to rest without surrendering vision. Life will always demand more from you as you grow. A strengthened mind keeps you prepared for the next level. A broken life begins with unchecked negative thinking, not with a single failure, a tragic event. Unfortunate season, no one wakes up one day and decides to live in defeat. The collapse is gradual, quiet, internal long before it becomes visible on the outside. It starts in the mind, in the thoughts that are tolerated, repeated, and eventually believed. What you allow to live in your thinking will eventually shape how you live your life. Negative thinking does not announce itself as dangerous. It often disguises itself as realism, caution, or wisdom gained from past pain. It whispers subtle statements like, protect yourself, don't get your hopes up, or you've been here before, it won't work out. At first, these thoughts feel safe. They seem like shields against disappointment. But over time, what was meant to protect you begins to imprison you. The mind slowly builds walls where there should have been doors. A broken life is rarely the result of one catastrophic moment. It is more often the result of consistently feeding the mind thoughts that weaken courage and drain hope. The problem is not that negative thoughts appear in the mind. Everyone experiences them. The problem is when those thoughts are left unchallenged, unquestioned, and uncorrected. Thoughts that go unexamined gain authority. Once they take root, they begin to influence decisions, behavior, and identity. Check negative thinking changes how you interpret reality. A delay becomes a denial. A correction feels like rejection. A challenge feels like confirmation that you're not enough. The mind begins to connect everything to past disappointment. Life is no longer experienced as it is, but as it was. This is how people become trapped in emotional time loops, reliving old failures while standing in new opportunities they cannot recognize. Negative thinking has a way of shrinking vision. Dreams that once felt alive begin to feel impractical. Passion fades into routine, gets replaced with survival. People stop asking what is possible and start asking, what can I avoid losing? When this shift happens, life may continue on the surface, but meaning quietly disappears underneath. A broken life does not always look broken. Many people function well professionally while being emotionally exhausted. They smile publicly but struggle privately. Their calendar is full, their spirit is empty. What they call burnout is often the result of years of carrying unaddressed mental weight. Negative thinking is heavy, drains energy, motivation, and clarity, leaving a person tired even when nothing physically demanding has occurred. Check negative thinking also distorts self-perception. Over time, persons stop saying, I failed, and start saying, I am a failure. Temporary setbacks become permanent labels. Identity gets tangled with experience, and personal worth becomes conditional. When the mind is trapped in this pattern, even success feels fragile because it does not match the internal story being told. The danger of negative thinking is not just what it says, but what it silences. It silences creativity, boldness, vulnerability, and risk. It convinces people to stay in unhealthy relationships, unfulfilling roles, and limiting environments because the unknown feels more threatening than discomfort. A broken life is often one that settled, not because it lacked desire, because the mind lacked courage. Negative thinking also isolates. It makes people believe they are alone in their struggle, uniquely flawed, or beyond help. This isolation deepens the damage, creating a sense of shame that keeps healing at a distance. When people believe their thoughts are facts, they stop seeking perspective. When they stop seeking perspective, distortion becomes reality. Life begins to fracture when the mind becomes a place of constant criticism instead of constructive reflection. Healthy minds correct behavior. Unhealthy minds attack identity. Instead of saying, this needs growth, negative thinking says, you'll never change. Over time, the emotional cost of this internal dialogue erodes resilience. The person still wants improvement, but no longer believes in possibility. Check negative thinking also weakens endurance. Challenges that once built strength now feel unbearable. The emotional tolerance for discomfort decreases because the mind constantly predicts failure. Instead of pushing through, people pull back. Avoidance replaces effort. Excuses replace accountability. This is not laziness, it is mental fatigue caused by an inner environment that offers no encouragement. The mind is creative, it produces what it consumes. Feed it fear, and it will manufacture reasons to stay small. Feed it doubt, and it will find evidence to justify hesitation. This doesn't mean ignoring reality or pretending everything is perfect. It means refusing to let negativity dominate the narrative. Reality can be acknowledged without being weaponized against your future. A broken life often stays broken not because repair is impossible, because awareness has not arrived. Healing begins when a person realizes they are not powerless over their thoughts. Negative thinking may be learned. It is not permanent. The moment thoughts are questioned, their control begins to weaken. Change does not happen when circumstances improve. It happens when thinking changes. The mind must be trained to interrupt destructive patterns and replace them with intentional truth. This takes patience. Thought patterns took years to form. They do not disappear overnight. But every time a negative thought is confronted instead of obeyed, strength is restored. Every time perspective replaces panic, life begins to stabilize. A restored life begins the same way a broken one did in the mind. The difference is awareness, discipline, and choice. You cannot stop thoughts from knocking, but you can decide which ones are allowed to stay. A broken life begins with unchecked negative thinking, but a healed life begins when thinking is finally brought under control. Pain is not the enemy, feels like one, sounds like one, and often arrives uninvited, but it is not the force that ruins lives. The true destruction begins when pain is misunderstood, resisted without reflection, or allowed to define identity. Pain itself is neutral. It is a messenger. What makes it dangerous is not its presence, but our response to it. Every person encounters pain. It crosses boundaries of age, status, belief, and background. No one is exempt, yet pain does not produce the same outcome in everyone. Some people emerge wiser, stronger, and more grounded, while others become bitter, guarded, and withdrawn. The difference is not the pain, it is the meaning attached to it. Pain exposes what we believe about ourselves, our future, and the world around us. Pain arrives to get attention. It is the body, the mind, or the soul saying that something needs to be addressed. Ignoring it does not make it disappear. Suppressing it only relocates it. Is not healed emotionally often resurfaces mentally, physically, or relationally. Pain denied becomes pain multiplied. Pain acknowledged becomes pain processed. The mistake many people make is assuming that pain has come to destroy them. This belief turns pain into an identity rather than an experience. Instead of saying, I went through something painful, the language becomes, this is who I am now. When pain becomes personal rather than informative, it hardens the heart and narrows perspective. Life begins to feel dangerous. Self-protection replaces growth. Pain is a teacher, not a tyrant. It shows where boundaries were crossed, where expectations were misplaced, and where strength has not yet been developed. Growth never happens in comfort. Comfort maintains the familiar. Pain introduces change. Without pain, progress would be shallow and maturity would be optional. Many of the qualities people admire most, empathy, resilience, patience, wisdom, are often born through pain. Pain slows you down so you can see what you were rushing past. In a world that glorifies speed and productivity, pain demands stillness. It forces reflection. It asks difficult but necessary questions. What matters? What doesn't? What have you been tolerating that is costing you your peace? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are clarifying. Pain strips away illusions and exposes what is real. One of the most powerful things pain does is reveal strength you didn't know you had. When life is easy, potential stays hidden. When pressure arrives, endurance is discovered. You don't know how deep your courage runs until quitting feels logical and you decide to stand anyway. Pain does not create strength. It reveals it. The enemy is not pain. The enemy is what pain can turn into when left unmanaged. Pain can become bitterness, and bitterness can reshape a personality. It can become fear, and fear can dictate decisions. It can become numbness, and numbness can steal joy. These are not inevitable outcomes. They are avoidable responses. Pain itself does not poison the heart. Unresolved pain does. Pain also teaches humility. It reminds people of their limitations, their need for support, and their shared humanity. It softens judgment and deepens compassion. Those who have known pain often understand others better. They listen differently. They love more carefully. What once felt like a wound becomes a well of empathy. There is a purpose in pain that cannot be rushed. Healing is not instant, and it should not be. Pain processed too quickly is often pain avoided. True healing requires honesty, admitting what hurt, how deeply it affected you, what it changed inside of you. Avoidance may feel strong, but it postpones freedom. Confrontation feels weak, but it opens the door to restoration. Pain challenges the false belief that strength means never breaking. Real strength is revealed in how you rebuild. Cracks are not proof of failure. They are evidence of survival. A person who has faced pain and continued forward carries a quiet confidence born not of arrogance, but of endurance. Pain also refines identity. It separates what is attached from what is essential. Many people discover who they truly are when what they depended on is removed. Titles fall away, applause disappears, expectations change. What remains after pain is what was real all along. Running from pain gives it power. Facing pain takes it away. When you sit with it, learn from it, and allow it to pass through rather than take over, pain loses its authority. It becomes part of your story, not the headline. Pain is not the enemy, stagnation is. Refusing to grow, refusing to heal, refusing to change is what damages lives. Pain invites evolution. It forces honesty. It demands courage. When answered wisely, pain becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. One day you will look back and realize that the moments that hurt the most were also the moments that shaped you the deepest. Not because pain was good, because you didn't let it break you. You let it teach you. And that is when pain stops being an enemy and becomes a turning point. A strong mind responds to hardship with purpose, not panic. That distinction determines whether difficulty becomes a turning point or a breaking point. Hardship is inevitable, but panic is optional. What separates those who grow through adversity from those who collapse under it is not the size of the problem, the condition of the mind facing it. A strong mind does not deny hardship, it just refuses to let hardship take command. Panic is a reaction rooted in loss of control. It rushes to conclusions, magnifies fear, and demands an immediate escape. Purpose, on the other hand, slows the moment down. It asks questions instead of assuming answers. It seeks meaning rather than merely relief. When hardship arrives, untrained mind looks for the fastest way out, while the strong mind looks for the wisest way through. Hardship exposes what the mind has been rehearsing. When pressure hits, you don't rise to the level of your motivation, you fall to the level of your mental preparation. A mind accustomed to clarity, discipline, perspective will respond differently than a mind trained in anxiety and avoidance. This is why some people remain stable in chaos while others unravel under uncertainty. A strong mind understands that panic clouds judgment. It knows that rushed decisions made under emotional pressure often create problems greater than the original hardship. Purpose brings restraint, resists impulsive reactions, and chooses thoughtful action. Purpose says, this moment deserves reflection. Fear, panic tries to end discomfort quickly. Purpose aims to end it correctly. Hardship tests identity. It pushes against confidence and questions capacity. In these moments, a strong mind does not negotiate with doubt, does not allow temporary trouble to rewrite permanent truth. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? It asks, what is required of me now? That shift in language changes everything. One question weakens you, the other equips you. Purpose provides direction when circumstances feel disorienting. It acts as an internal compass, keeping the mind anchored when everything external feels unstable. A mind without purpose reacts to every wave. A mind with purpose navigates through them. Panic looks for certainty before moving. Purpose moves forward even when certainty is unavailable. A strong mind accepts that hardship is not a sign of failure. It is often a signal of progression. Growth disrupts comfort. Change resists familiarity. Purpose recognizes that some of the most valuable lessons are concealed inside uncomfortable experiences. Panic only sees danger. Purpose sees development. This does not mean a strong mind feels nothing. Fear may appear, frustration may rise, exhaustion may whisper. But these feelings do not lead. They inform. Strong mind listens without surrendering authority. It acknowledges emotion without surrendering direction. Emotional awareness becomes a resource, not a ruler. Purpose transforms hardship into strategy. Instead of reacting emotionally, a strong mind begins to evaluate what can be controlled, what must be released, what adjustments are required. Panic wants everything resolved immediately. Purpose understands that resolution sometimes unfolds in stages and requires endurance. Hardship often reveals priorities. When comfort is removed, what remains is what matters most. A strong mind uses hardship to clean house, to let go of distractions, unhealthy attachments, and fragile dependencies. Panic clings desperately. Purpose releases intentionally. One of the greatest strengths of a strong mind is perspective. Recognizes that this moment is not the whole story. Panic lives in the now and assumes forever. Purpose remembers past survival, present resources, and future possibility. It sees a season, not a sentence. Purpose also stabilizes behavior. Under pressure, many people abandon discipline. They stop caring for themselves, neglect important relationships, and compromise values. A strong mind does the opposite. It tightens standards, protects routines, and leans into structure. Purpose understands that consistency during hardship is not restrictive, it is protective. Hardship does not demand perfection, it demands presence. A strong mind remains engaged rather than overwhelmed. It shows up even when outcomes are uncertain. Panic disconnects, shuts down, or lashes out. Purpose stays grounded and responsive. When hardship lasts longer than expected, panic loses stamina. It exhausts quickly. Purpose endures. Purpose understands that strength is not found in emotional intensity, but in disciplined persistence. Many people begin strong but finish broken because panic burns energy without direction. Purpose conserves energy by channeling it wisely. A strong mind does not rush healing. It respects the process. It allows hardship to do its refining work. Panic wants immediate relief. Purpose is willing to endure temporary discomfort for lasting growth. In time, hardship becomes a memory, but the mindset developed during it remains. Panic leaves scars. Purpose leaves wisdom. People rarely regret responding with patience, integrity, and intention, but they often regret reacting in fear. A strong mind responds to hardship with purpose, not panic, because it understands this truth: hardship does not dictate destiny. The response does. When your mind chooses purpose, even the hardest season becomes a builder rather than a breaker. What you repeatedly think eventually controls your actions. This is not a theory. It is a principle as old as human existence. Your mind is the command center of your life. Every habit, every decision, every word you speak, every relationship you cultivate, and every goal you achieve begins as a thought. Thoughts are seeds, and seeds, nourished consistently, grow into reality. If you allow destructive, fearful, or limiting thoughts to take root and flourish, they will dictate your behavior, your choices, and ultimately the trajectory of your life. Conversely, if you cultivate thoughts of faith, courage, possibility, your actions will align with growth, resilience, and success. The power of thought is both subtle and relentless. At first, may seem harmless, even fleeting. You might think, I can't do this, or I'm not enough, and dismiss it as temporary. When that thought is repeated, lingered upon, and believed, it becomes more than a passing idea. It transforms into a belief. Belief is far more influential than circumstances. Beliefs shape perception. They shape confidence. They shape decisions. What you repeatedly think starts as an internal conversation, but eventually becomes an external reality. A person who constantly thinks of failure will unconsciously make choices that limit success. They may hesitate to take opportunities, second-guess their abilities, and avoid risks that could lead to growth. They do not always realize they are doing this. It happens naturally because their actions are directed by a mind that has rehearsed limitation. In contrast, a person who repeatedly thinks, I am capable, I can learn, I will overcome this challenge, will begin to take consistent steps toward their goals. The repetition of thought becomes the rehearsal for action. Repeated thinking also rewires the brain. Neuroscience confirms that the brain is plastic. It changes based on experience and repetition. Every thought you dwell on strengthens neural pathways. Positive, powering thoughts create pathways that support action aligned with your goals. Negative, fear-driven thoughts create pathways that reinforce avoidance, doubt, inaction. This is why habits are so difficult to break and why self-sabotage can feel inevitable. Mind trained in negative thought produces negative behavior. A mind trained in positive thought produces positive behavior. The danger of repeated negative thinking is that it eventually feels automatic. You may not even recognize that your actions are being dictated by a silent, internal script. For example, if you consistently think, I am unlucky, you may unconsciously avoid opportunities, interpret challenges as threats, make choices that confirm your own belief. The mind does not distinguish between truth and repetition. It acts on what it believes. Repetition strengthens belief. Repeated thinking also shapes emotional responses. Thoughts create feelings, and feelings drive behavior. If your repeated thoughts are rooted in fear, anger, or inadequacy, your actions will be reactive rather than intentional. You may lash out, withdraw, give up prematurely. On the other hand, if your repeated thoughts are rooted in faith, gratitude, and confidence, your actions will be proactive, resilient, focused. What you repeatedly think does not just control what you do, it controls how you respond emotionally to life. Critical aspect of repeated thinking is its influence on perception. People see the world not as it is, but as they are conditioned to think it is. Repeated thoughts create a lens through which reality is filtered. If someone consistently thinks is unfair, they will notice injustice more than opportunity. If someone consistently thinks, I can make a difference, they will notice solutions, allies, and resources that others miss. The lens of thought colors every observation and informs every action. Repetition creates habits. Thoughts that are entertained daily guide small choices which compound into patterns. A person who repeatedly thinks, I will exercise, eventually builds a routine of physical activity. A person who repeatedly thinks, "I cannot manage my finances," may unconsciously spend recklessly or avoid planning. Habits are the bridge between thought and action. They demonstrate how powerful repeated thinking is because over time, the mind's private conversation manifests as tangible results. Intentional repeated thinking is the foundation of mastery. Great leaders, athletes, and creators understand that mental rehearsal shapes performance. They repeatedly visualize success, affirm capability, and focus on desired outcomes. This is why they perform consistently under pressure. Their minds have been trained through repetition, and their actions reflect the internal work they have done long before the world witnesses it. Repeated thinking is also the battlefield of identity. Who you believe you are determines how you act. If your repeated thoughts are, "I am weak" or "I am not enough," you act as though those labels are true, even if evidence suggests otherwise. If your repeated thoughts are, "I am resilient" or I am capable," you act with confidence, even in the face of uncertainty. The repetition of thoughts sculpts the person you become. Your identity is a reflection of the thoughts you entertain daily. To harness this power, one must become aware of the thoughts that are repeated. Many people allow negative, fearful, or self-limiting thoughts to run unchecked. Awareness is the first step toward change. When you notice destructive thinking, you can interrupt it, question it, and replace it with purposeful alternatives. This is not denial or avoidance. It is the conscious cultivation of thoughts that serve your life rather than sabotage it. Discipline in thought is as important as discipline in action. Just as an athlete trains muscles through repeated practice, the mind must be trained through repeated, intentional thought. The difference is that mental training is invisible, but no less real. Each day you choose empowering thoughts over destructive ones. You are strengthening the pathways that will later guide your actions. Repeated thinking is cumulative. One day of positive thought will not change everything, but repeated over weeks, months, and years, it reshapes life. What you think daily forms habits, habits form character, and character determines destiny. This principle is both humbling and empowering. It is humbling because it reminds us that neglecting our mental life has consequences. It is empowering because it means that intentional, disciplined thinking can rewrite our future. Your thoughts also influence the people around you. Repeated patterns of thinking affect speech, behavior, energy. A person who repeatedly thinks positively radiates confidence and attracts collaboration. Person who repeatedly thinks negatively radiates doubt and discouragement. Thoughts may begin privately, but their impact is always public. Ultimately, what you repeatedly think becomes your reality. It is a silent architect building the life you will live. The mind cannot produce what it has not rehearsed. Action follows thought, habit follows action, and destiny follows habit. If you want to change your life, it begins with the thoughts you allow yourself to dwell upon day after day. Repeated thinking is the invisible hand guiding every aspect of life. You are aware of it or not, the mind acts on what it believes, and since belief is formed by repetition, the most important question you can ask yourself is, what am I choosing to think every day? If your answer is negative, limiting, or fearful, your actions will reflect that. If your answer is intentional, empowering, and focused, your actions will reflect growth, resilience, and purpose. The truth is simple but profound. What you repeatedly think eventually controls your actions, and your actions control your life. Therefore, mastery begins in the mind. Train it, feed it, guard it, repeat thoughts that empower, challenge, and uplift. Over time, those repeated thoughts will become the actions that shape your life, the habits that define your character, and the destiny you are meant to live. Mental discipline is more powerful than external circumstances. It is the invisible force that determines how we respond to the visible realities around us. Life is unpredictable, chaotic, and often unfair. Opportunities arrive late, people fail us, situations go awry, and plans fall apart. External circumstances are rarely perfect, and they are never fully under our control. But the mind, trained, disciplined, and intentional, remains the ultimate governor of action, character, and destiny. When mental discipline is strong, it can overcome disadvantage, endure hardship, and create opportunity where none seems to exist. External circumstances can intimidate, frustrate, or delay. They cannot dictate internal resolve unless the mind permits it. Two people may face identical circumstances: loss of a job, a health crisis, relational conflict, financial pressure. But the outcomes will often be worlds apart. One may collapse under the weight of circumstance, blaming the world, dwelling in despair, and giving up prematurely. The other may rise, adapt, and navigate successfully, not because the problem disappeared, because mental discipline guided each decision and each reaction. This demonstrates a profound truth. Mastery over the mind has greater impact than mastery over environment. Mental discipline allows a person to act with intentionality rather than react impulsively. External circumstances often provoke fear, anger, or discouragement. Without discipline, the mind becomes a slave to emotion. Panic, frustration, and resentment dictate decisions. The result is often mistakes, regret, stagnation. With mental discipline, however, the mind observes emotion without surrendering authority to it. It processes challenges calmly, analyzes possibilities, and responds strategically. Discipline ensures that reactions are rooted in purpose rather than in chaos. One of the most powerful aspects of mental discipline is the ability to focus. Circumstances are distracting. They scream for attention, shift priorities, introduce confusion. A disciplined mind refuses to be pulled in every direction. It maintains clarity, prioritizes effectively, concentrates on what can be controlled. This focus transforms adversity into progress. External events may continue to fluctuate. Disciplined attention ensures that energy is invested in productive action rather than wasted in worry or complaint. Mental discipline is the foundation of resilience. Life will inevitably test endurance. Problems will arise that are beyond preparation, and outcomes may be delayed or different from expectations. Mental discipline equips the mind to withstand these tests without collapse. It builds patience, self-control, and persistence. A person with mental discipline does not quit because circumstances are difficult. Instead, they navigate systematically, understanding that progress is measured in consistent effort over time, not in immediate comfort. External circumstances often demand flexibility. Life rarely unfolds according to plan. Mental discipline allows for adaptive thinking while maintaining core values and goals. Does not react impulsively to change, but evaluates options, adjusts strategy, and persists in pursuit of objectives. Circumstances may shift, but a disciplined mind finds a way to operate effectively within new parameters. This ability to pivot without losing focus is the hallmark of mental strength. Mental discipline also influences emotional stability. External circumstances provoke stress, fear, or anger. A person without discipline allows external events to dictate mood, behavior, and outlook. In contrast, mental discipline cultivates emotional regulation, acknowledges feelings, but does not surrender to them. Discipline teaches the mind to respond thoughtfully rather than react destructively. Over time, this control reduces suffering, strengthens relationships, and increases the capacity to persevere. Another critical aspect of mental discipline is delayed gratification. Circumstances often pressure people to seek immediate relief or instant results. A person lacking discipline may surrender to short-term comfort, abandon long-term goals, or make decisions that undermine future success. A disciplined mind, however, prioritizes long-term benefits over temporary satisfaction. It sacrifices immediate pleasure when necessary, invests energy in sustainable solutions, and maintains integrity under pressure. This is why disciplined individuals often achieve results far beyond what circumstances initially allowed. Mental discipline also creates consistency. Circumstances fluctuate unpredictably. Some days are favorable, others are challenging. Without discipline, performance is erratic, dictated by mood, convenience, or external pressure. With discipline, action becomes reliable and steady, regardless of external conditions. Consistency is the multiplier of effort. Repeated, disciplined action over time yields results that exceed what circumstances alone might predict. External circumstances can be a source of distraction or discouragement, but they cannot diminish what has been cultivated internally. Mental discipline ensures that skill, knowledge, and effort are applied strategically regardless of environment. A person with discipline can work under unfavorable conditions, seize opportunities in adversity, and maintain purpose even when external support is lacking. The mind becomes a command center that controls what can be controlled while circumstances shift without determining destiny. Mental discipline also shapes character. Circumstances test patience' integrity and perseverance when the mind is disciplined, acts in alignment with principles rather than impulses. Discipline strengthens decision-making, shapes habits, and builds more courage. Over time, character becomes a stabilizing force that allows a person to thrive even when external conditions are unstable. Conversely, without mental discipline, character is easily compromised, and external challenges magnify weaknesses rather than develop strength. Power of mental discipline is evident in history and personal experience. Many individuals who faced extreme poverty, rejection, illness, societal disadvantage achieved extraordinary results because their minds were trained to respond with focus, perseverance, and strategic action. Conversely, many who appeared to have every external advantage failed because they lacked the internal governance to make wise choices, resist distraction, endure difficulty. This underscores the principle that mental discipline is a greater predictor of success than favorable circumstances. Mental discipline also cultivates creativity and problem solving. Adversity often presents obstacles without obvious solutions. Mind trained in discipline remains calm, evaluates options, and identifies innovative approaches. Panic, in contrast, narrows vision and intensifies confusion. Disciplined mind sees opportunity within limitation, turning obstacles into stepping stones. Circumstances may be harsh. Disciplined thinking transforms difficulty into strategic advantage. Finally, mental discipline empowers the individual with autonomy. Life is unpredictable. The disciplined mind retains control over choices, responses, and actions. Circumstances may impose challenges, but they cannot force compromise, surrender, failure unless the mind allows it. Discipline creates freedom within constraint. It ensures that regardless of external chaos, internal governance remains intact, guiding action with purpose, patience, and resolve. In conclusion, mental discipline is more powerful than external circumstances because it governs perception, response, consistency, resilience, and character. Life cannot be controlled, but the mind can be trained. A disciplined mind interprets challenges strategically, acts intentionally, maintains focus despite disruption. Circumstances may test delay or pressure, but they cannot overpower a mind that is disciplined, alert, and anchored in purpose. Mental discipline transforms hardship into opportunities, setbacks into lessons, and chaos into progress. It is the invisible force that ensures that no matter what life throws, the individual rises, persists, and achieves. Mastery over the mind is mastery over life itself. Growth requires confronting fear instead of obeying it. This is a principle that cannot be bypassed or ignored, no matter how talented, intelligent, or fortunate someone may be. Fear is one of the most powerful forces in human life. It signals danger, triggers protective instincts, and demands attention. Yet, if fear is obeyed rather than confronted, it becomes a prison. It limits potential, stalls progress, prevents people from stepping into the fullness of their purpose. Growth. True growth is impossible without facing fear directly and refusing to let it dictate decisions. Fear appears in many forms: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown, and even fear of success. Each form seeks the same result: to control action, shape choices, and constrain possibility. The problem is not fear itself. Fear is natural, even necessary. It alerts us to potential danger, encourages caution, and preserves life in critical moments. Problem arises when fear becomes a ruler instead of a messenger. When we obey it blindly, every thought, choice, action becomes filtered through doubt and limitation, and growth stalls before it even begins. Confronting fear requires courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear. Growth demands courage because meaningful progress always involves stepping into uncertainty. If there were no risk, no discomfort, no challenge, there would be no learning, no adaptation, and no development. The growth process stretches the mind, tests resilience, and exposes gaps in skill, character, and wisdom. Fear resists this process. It tempts retreat, stagnation, and comfort over advancement. The moment a person chooses to confront fear, they are choosing the pathway to growth. Fear thrives on avoidance. It whispers, "Not now. Wait until it's easier," or "someone else can do it." Obeying these whispers may feel safe in the short term, but over time, avoidance becomes a habit. Avoidance creates a life constrained by possibility, filled with regret and defined by what could have been. Growth, in contrast, is forged in the furnace of confrontation. Every time a person confronts fear, the mind learns that discomfort is not fatal, and the heart discovers that courage is stronger than hesitation. Confronting fear requires preparation and awareness. It is not a reckless leap into the unknown, a deliberate decision to face the challenge with intentionality. It involves identifying the source of fear, understanding why it arises, and choosing action that aligns with purpose rather than surrendering to instinctive retreat. This conscious engagement with fear trains resilience. Each confrontation builds mental strength, emotional endurance, and confidence, creating a foundation for further growth. Growth is cumulative. One confrontation with fear does not guarantee permanent transformation, but repeated acts of courage reshape identity. Over time, a person becomes someone who no longer allows fear to define choices. The mind and heart are strengthened through repetition. Each fear confronted reinforces the lesson that fear can be managed, endured, and even leveraged as a guide toward opportunity. Fear becomes a signal rather than a sentence. Fear is often magnified by imagination. People tend to exaggerate worst-case scenarios, anticipate rejection, and visualize failure before attempting anything new. Obeying fear allows this imagined threat to dominate reality. Confronting fear, however, involves taking action despite these imagined scenarios. Growth begins when action replaces speculation, experience replaces assumption, courage replaces hesitation. The mind learns that reality is rarely as catastrophic as fear predicts. Growth requires confronting fear because fear tests the limits of possibility. Comfort zones are defined by the absence of fear. Growth exists outside of them. If we remain in the familiar, we limit potential. Personal, professional, and spiritual development all require stepping into areas of discomfort, ambiguity, and challenge. Fear seeks to maintain the status quo, but growth thrives in expansion. Confrontation with fear is the bridge between who we are and who we are capable of becoming. Do believe in yourself enough to move forward despite uncertainty. Each time fear is confronted, it affirms inner capability, strengthens self-trust, and builds confidence. Obeying fear erodes self-esteem and convinces the mind that limitations are permanent. Confronting fear builds character and reaffirms that personal strength exists even in the presence of doubt and challenge. Confronting fear requires persistence. Some fears cannot be conquered in a single attempt. Life presents recurring challenges, and the mind often resists change repeatedly before adaptation occurs. Growth requires patience, endurance, and the willingness to face fear multiple times. Each confrontation becomes easier, each action more confident, each decision more intentional. Repetition transforms fear from a controlling force into a teacher and motivator. The process of confronting fear also cultivates creativity and problem solving. When people obey fear, they avoid challenges and settle for what is known. When fear is confronted, the mind is forced to innovate, to find solutions, and to adapt. Growth often comes not from following the safe path, from navigating obstacles that initially seem insurmountable. Fear, when engaged courageously, becomes a catalyst for resourcefulness. Facing fear develops resilience. Life is unpredictable, and challenges are inevitable. If we obey fear at every turn, we remain vulnerable to circumstances and dependent on external reassurance. Growth requires resilience, the ability to endure adversity, recover quickly, and continue moving forward. Each act of confronting fear builds resilience, demonstrating that obstacles are temporary and that personal strength is enduring. Growth also requires reframing fear. Fear can be interpreted as a signal rather than a barrier. It often indicates where progress lies, where the opportunity for expansion exists, or where personal development is needed. Confronting fear allows the mind to see possibility rather than threat, potential rather than danger, and lessons rather than limitations. Growth begins when fear becomes a guidepost rather than a gatekeeper. Confronting fear strengthens faith, faith in oneself, faith in preparation, and faith in the process of life. People who obey fear often rely on external validation, permission, or certainty. Those who confront fear cultivate internal assurance, trust their capacity to handle challenge, and accept that uncertainty is part of the journey. Growth is inseparable from this internal trust. Finally, growth requires action. Thinking about courage is not the same as demonstrating courage. Confronting fear is a series of actions taken despite apprehension, hesitation, or doubt. Every decision to act builds momentum, reinforces confidence, and expands potential. Obeying fear guarantees inaction and stagnation. Confronting fear produces results, maturity, and transformation. In conclusion, growth cannot occur without confronting fear. Fear will always exist, but it only has power if obeyed. True progress demands courage, persistence, and the willingness to face discomfort head-on. Each confrontation strengthens character, builds resilience, and reveals potential. The path of growth is never free from fear. It is defined by the ability to act in spite of it. To grow is to acknowledge fear, stand firm, and move forward with intention. Growth requires confronting fear, not obeying it, because every step taken in courage expands the boundaries of what is possible, reshaping life, identity, destiny. Healing starts when responsibility replaces excuses. This is a profound truth that underlies every transformation, restoration, personal breakthrough. Too often, people remain stuck in cycles of pain, disappointment, and frustration, not because healing is impossible, because they refuse to own their part in the process. Excuses provide comfort, distraction, and temporary justification for stagnation. Responsibility, on the other hand, demands courage, clarity, and accountability. True healing, emotional, mental, spiritual, cannot occur until responsibility becomes the guiding principle. Excuses are seductive. They tell us that we are powerless, that circumstances are to blame, that others are at fault. They shield the ego from discomfort and protect the mind from guilt. It's not my fault. I didn't deserve this, or I couldn't have done anything, are phrases that sound reasonable. And in many ways, they are human. Yet when repeated, they anchor a person to helplessness. Excuses externalize responsibility, making it someone else's problem to fix, and in doing so, delay healing indefinitely. Healing is not about assigning blame. It is about reclaiming power. When we take responsibility, we acknowledge that while we may not control every event, we do control our response. We do control the choice we make in the aftermath of pain. Excuses relinquish this power. Responsibility claims it. This shift is critical because healing is active, not passive. It is a process that requires participation, intention, and commitment. One cannot heal while waiting for external circumstances to change. Healing begins internally with the decision to act. Responsibility replaces excuses by redirecting focus inward rather than outward. Excuses focus on why this happened to me, while responsibility asks, what can I do about this? One perspective keeps the mind trapped in victimhood, while the other opens the door to growth, restoration, and opportunity. The difference is not trivial. It determines whether a person remains stuck in pain or begins to move forward with clarity and purpose. Taking responsibility also requires honesty. Healing cannot occur in denial, self-deception, or avoidance. It requires confronting the truth of one's own actions, choices, and patterns. Excuses distort truth. They allow selective perception, bias, and rationalization to dictate the narrative of one's life. Responsibility demands confronting uncomfortable realities, acknowledging mistakes, and recognizing the ways in which personal decisions contributed to the current state. While painful, this honesty is liberating because it transforms powerlessness into control. Healing begins when responsibility replaces excuses because responsibility fosters empowerment. When a person owns their circumstances, even partially, they recognize that they have agency. They can make choices that redirect energy, repair relationships, and restore health. Excuses, by contrast, foster dependence on external forces, waiting for someone else to act, fix, or validate. Responsibility is self-sufficient. It does not rely on the consent of others. This autonomy is essential for genuine healing. Excuses also perpetuate stagnation by creating a narrative of inevitability. I will never recover. This is just who I am. I will always be this way. Are phrases rooted in avoidance. They deny the possibility of growth. Responsibility disrupts this narrative. It asserts that while circumstances may be difficult, change is possible through deliberate action, reflection, and effort. Healing begins when a person moves from passive acceptance to active engagement, recognizing that their future is not predetermined but shaped by choices made today. Another critical aspect of responsibility is accountability. Healing is accelerated when one accepts accountability not only to oneself but also to others affected by the situation. Excuses isolate. They place blame externally, creating separation and often perpetuating conflict. Responsibility connects. It seeks restoration, repair, and reconciliation. Whether in relationships, career, or personal habits, taking responsibility invites constructive dialogue, encourages forgiveness, and fosters trust. Healing is rarely a solitary process. Accountability expands the possibility of restoration. Responsibility also transforms mindset. Excuses are rooted in scarcity thinking, fear, limitation, and avoidance dominate the mental landscape. Responsibility cultivates abundance thinking, possibility, growth, and action dominate perception. A mind trained in responsibility sees setbacks as opportunities to learn and refine rather than reasons to surrender. It recognizes that mistakes are not final verdicts, but lessons that guide the next step. Healing starts when the mind adopts this perspective, replacing the paralysis of excuses with the momentum of intentionality. Emotional healing in particular requires responsibility. Pain, betrayal, disappointment, loss often leave emotional wounds that fester when excused or ignored. Excuses might say, "I can't move on because they hurt me," or "it's not fair, so I don't have to forgive." Responsibility, by contrast, says, "I will choose my response, and I will reclaim peace regardless of past hurt." Emotional restoration comes not from controlling others, from mastering one's own heart and mind. Taking responsibility also enables proactive healing. It prompts action rather than reaction. Excuses lead to inertia, waiting for external circumstances to align, waiting for validation, waiting for conditions to improve. Responsibility initiates self-directed action, seeking therapy, practicing self-care, setting boundaries, repairing relationships, or developing new skills. Healing is not passive, it is intentional. Every step taken in responsibility moves a person closer to restoration. Physical and mental health also respond to responsibility. Many people excuse neglect, saying, "I don't have time, I can't afford it," or "it's too late." Responsibility reframes the situation. Small steps can I take today to care for myself? This shift in perspective initiates behavior that restores wellness, strengthens resilience, supports long-term healing. Responsibility transforms excuses into actionable solutions. Responsibility is also about learning from the past without being imprisoned by it. Excuses cling to history, replaying narratives of failure, injustice, limitation. Responsibility acknowledges the past but refuses to allow it to dictate the future. Healing begins when a person learns from what happened, accepts what cannot be changed, and focuses on what can be improved or restored. This forward-focused mindset is essential for recovery and transformation. Healing starts when responsibility replaces excuses because responsibility instills empowerment, focus, honesty, accountability, and action. It transforms passive suffering into active restoration. Excuses maintain the illusion of helplessness. Responsibility reveals the reality of agency. Excuses prolong pain. Responsibility accelerates growth. The moment a person stops rationalizing, blaming, and avoiding, and instead takes ownership of their choices, responses, and future, true healing begins. Ultimately, healing is not given, it is claimed. It is not imposed by circumstances. It is cultivated through intentional decisions. Every excuse resisted, every responsibility embraced. Every action taken with purpose strengthens the mind, restores the heart, and rebuilds life. Healing starts when responsibility replaces excuses because ownership is the gateway to freedom, transformation, and restoration. It is the moment when a person stops living in limitation and begins living in possibility, reclaiming control over their story, their choices, and their destiny. Strengthening the mind is the first step to rebuilding life. This is a truth often overlooked because we are conditioned to focus on external solutions, changing circumstances, acquiring resources, seeking validation from others. Yet life is not rebuilt through external fixes alone. It is reconstructed from the inside out. The mind is the command center of our existence. It governs thought, choice, action, and resilience. Until the mind is strengthened, Attempts to rebuild life will be temporary, reactive, or incomplete. True transformation begins when the mind is trained, disciplined, prepared to face challenges with clarity and determination. The process of rebuilding life begins with understanding that the mind is both the battlefield and the architect of reality. A life disrupted by hardship, trauma, failure, or loss often leaves the mind unsettled. Doubt, fear, and confusion dominate thought patterns, making every decision feel heavy and uncertain. When the mind is weak, it interprets obstacles as insurmountable, setbacks as permanent, and the future as uncertain. This is why attempts to rebuild life without first addressing mental strength are often shallow. The outer life may appear stable temporarily. The internal structure remains vulnerable. Strengthening the mind requires awareness. It begins with recognizing the thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions that have been governing behavior, often unconsciously. Many people rebuild externally while neglecting internal processes to repeat the same patterns that led to brokenness. Awareness allows the individual to identify limiting beliefs, self-sabotaging habits, emotional vulnerabilities. It is the first step in creating a foundation of intentionality, without which rebuilding efforts are like constructing a house on sand. A strong mind is built through discipline. Discipline is the deliberate practice of shaping thought, focus, and response. It involves choosing clarity over confusion, perseverance over impulsivity, and logic over reactionary emotion. Mental discipline is what enables a person to navigate setbacks without collapsing, to remain committed when circumstances are unfavorable, and to act with purpose when the path is unclear. Life rebuilding demands consistency. Consistency is impossible without a mind trained to prioritize action over distraction. Strengthening the mind also involves cultivating resilience. Life will continue to present challenges even as we rebuild. A strong mind does not crumble under pressure. It absorbs lessons, adapts strategies, and persists in the face of adversity. Resilience is not a trait that appears automatically. It is developed through deliberate effort, reflection, and repeated exposure to difficulty. Each time a person overcomes fear, perseveres through discomfort, or responds with patience, the mind becomes stronger and better prepared for the next challenge. The mind is also shaped by focus. In rebuilding life, ability to direct attention intentionally is critical. Many people waste energy on distractions, regrets, or anxieties about the past and future. Strengthened mind understands that attention is currency. What you focus on grows, and what you neglect diminishes. Mental fortitude allows the individual to prioritize the actions that matter, filter out noise, and invest energy in productive, purposeful activity. Rebuilding life requires focus because scattered effort produces scattered results. Thought patterns must be retrained during the process of strengthening the mind. Negative thinking, self-doubt, and fear are natural responses to hardship. They are not allies in reconstruction. Mental strength involves recognizing these thoughts, challenging their validity, and replacing them with constructive, powering narratives. A mind that is trained to focus on possibility rather than limitation sets the stage for intentional action. What is repeated in thought eventually translates into habit, and what becomes habit eventually shapes life. Another essential aspect of strengthening the mind is emotional mastery. Emotions are powerful motivators, but when unmanaged, they can dictate choices, trigger impulsive reactions, and cloud judgment. A strong mind acknowledges emotion without surrendering to it. It processes feelings, extracts lessons, channels energy into action. Emotional stability is critical during life rebuilding because it ensures that decisions are strategic rather than reactionary. It allows the individual to act from clarity rather than chaos. Strengthening the mind also cultivates patience. Rebuilding life is never instantaneous. It is a process, often slow, demanding perseverance, reflection, and repeated effort. A mind that has been strengthened understands the value of gradual progress. It does not seek shortcuts or instant results, but commits to steady, disciplined work. Patience is the virtue that allows rebuilding efforts to endure the inevitable challenges, delays, and setbacks that life presents. Mental strength also enhances decision-making. A weakened mind is easily swayed by emotion, opinion, and pressure. A strong mind evaluates choices critically, aligns decisions with values and goals, and takes responsibility for outcomes. Every rebuilding process is punctuated by countless decisions, how to spend time, what habits to cultivate, which relationships to nurture, and which opportunities to pursue. A fortified mind ensures that these decisions are intentional, consistent, and conducive to long-term success. Rebuilding life requires vision, and vision is birthed in the mind. A strong mind can conceptualize a future beyond current circumstances. It imagines possibility, develops strategy, and anticipates obstacles. Without a mind capable of envisioning a better reality, rebuilding efforts lack direction and purpose. Strengthening the mind expands perspective, allowing the individual to see beyond immediate setbacks and work toward meaningful transformation. Accountability is another crucial component. A strong mind recognizes responsibility for past actions, present choices, and future outcomes. Excuses, blame, denial are obstacles to rebuilding because they prevent ownership. Mental strength encourages accountability, fostering personal growth and integrity. Taking responsibility, the individual reclaims agency, which is essential in reconstructing life with intention and stability. Rebuilding life also demands resilience to external influence. People's circumstances and societal pressures will always attempt to derail progress. A strengthened mind develops the capacity to maintain focus, clarity, and purpose despite these influences. It discerns what is beneficial, ignores distractions, and protects the energy needed to rebuild. The mind becomes the anchor, ensuring that external turbulence does not dictate the trajectory of life. Mental discipline, emotional resilience, focus, patience, vision, and accountability all converge to create the conditions for effective life reconstruction. The mind is strengthened, action is intentional, choices are wise, and setbacks are navigated with clarity rather than panic. What may seem impossible to the untrained mind becomes manageable through perspective, strategy, and persistence. Ultimately, strengthening the mind is the first step to rebuilding life because it forms the foundation for every other effort. External circumstances, resources, opportunities are temporary and unpredictable. A weak mind will squander advantage and falter under pressure. A strong mind converts challenge into opportunity, fear into courage, and chaos into structured action. Life cannot be truly rebuilt without first fortifying the mind because every success, every habit, and every decision stems from mental strength. When the mind is strengthened and the individual no longer reacts to life but responds to it, they act with clarity rather than confusion, purpose rather than desperation, and with resilience rather than surrender. Rebuilding life becomes not just possible, but sustainable. Because the internal foundation, mental strength, is unshakable. The first step to reconstruction is not external, it is internal. Strengthen the mind, and the rest will follow.